In this short video, we're going to look at how to do your shirt sleeve guard placket. So that's where on your sleeve you need to make this placket here, and then we'll look at how to make and then how to sew the cuff on. So that's what we're going to do next. Hopefully you've got your two sleeves, so you should have your left sleeve and your right sleeve. It's really important to make sure you know which one is which. This is the wrong side, if you like, of the sleeves, and hopefully you will have marked from your pattern the marking where you're going to put the sleeve placket. So here is my back notch markings, and so on this one, as it's the right, this is the marking for the sleeve placket, and that's my back notches. So as you can see, the shorter distance is towards the back of the sleeve and the larger distance is towards the front of the sleeve. So hopefully you have already cut out your cuff and your guards here. So what happens is that the bigger of the two guards, so that's that one, will always go onto the wider section, and the smaller one goes on the narrower section, if you see what I mean. So make sure you always get the right ones for the right sleeve, otherwise you're going to get into a bit of a pickle. Another thing I like to do, which I think really helps when we're putting these together, is to actually iron under all the little parts of the seam allowance on those plackets. So as you can see, this one is the bigger one, and I've ironed under all my seam allowances, and I've made sure I've got a nice crisp corner there. It's always good to look on the other side, then hopefully if you've created that really nice shape, that's what you're after, and this will really help us when we're sewing this on to have all that ironed under beforehand. So that's the smaller one. So again, as you see, I've ironed under all the seam allowance on that, and that's really going to help us when we sew this in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is line up my guards or my plackets. So the edge of the placket is going to go against that line where we're going to actually make the slit. So we're going to make sure that lines up nicely, and we're going to sew that in place on that 1 centimetre seam allowance line, which you've got your nice crisp ironed edge, so you should be able to see really well where you're going to sew that. And then the other one will butt up against that, like so. So the two edges, if you like, should be lining up with that line that you've put on there from your pattern, so you know exactly where that's going to go. So we really make sure that lines up really well. Now when you come to sew this, we're only going to sew up to the point where the seam allowance is, okay? We don't want to go all the way to the end, because then we can't fold over the sections that we need. So we're only going to sew up to the point where the seam allowances meet, okay? So that's the first thing we're going to do. So let's go to the machine to do that. So here we are at the machine, and we're going to sew the first sections of the placket. So I'm going to sew this first smaller one. So making sure that we're quite accurate where we're going to sew. So remember not to go too far. We are only going to go to that edge there, not all the way to the very end. So that's the smaller one done first. Now we're going to sew the other one. So again, make sure you're only going to that point. So now those two are both sewn on nicely. I'm actually now going to snip all the way up to the dot on that marking. So that's as far as we're going to go there. Then we're going to take the point up to where the stitching is. So it's like a little diagonal line, up to but not past that stitching. So you've got that, and we're going to do the same on this side, up to that point. So effectively you're creating a little triangle. So there's a little triangle at the top. Now we're going to work on the smaller section of your placket first. So let's turn the sleeve over, and that's what it should look like. So you've got your line of stitching up to there, and then you've got your little triangle there. Now we're going to take that smaller section and bring that around to the right side, if you like. And because we've done that ironing under, we should be able to fold that nicely, and that's just going to go just over the sewn line that we've just created. So I'm just going to put my pin in there. And again, at this end, we're just going to fold that over nicely. So hopefully that is all lining up nicely. You need to be as accurate as you can here. It's very important. Okay, so at this end, you need to make sure that that little triangle is facing up, and that part of the placket is up. But again, I'm only going to sew to just up to where the seam allowance is, okay? So I'm not going to sew all the way to the very end. Right, so let's do that now. So I'm just trying to edge stitch that. I'm just catching on the inside of that placket with my stitch line. Take your time, because you do want that to be very accurate. You don't want to miss the edge. So that's the first section done, all nice and neatly sewn. Okay, let's look at the next bit. So now we're going to bring over the larger section of our placket, and this will go over the one that you've just created. So because again we did all that nice ironing, that all should line up really well. Again, the one thing that we've really got to make sure we've got is that corner, little triangle, is up out of the way, that's up out of the way, and then here we just need to make sure that that edge is tucked in nicely. Okay, so when we bring that over across, that is now going to sit nicely over where we sewed before. So again, I'm going to put my pins in. and then making sure that that is all tucked up neatly on the inside. So when we go to stitch over this, it should all be encased. Okay, so we're going to come up this side. We're going to go along the triangle at the top, and then we're going to, where that edge is, we're just going to go from this corner to this corner with a straight stitch. Hopefully then you're catching everything all neatly inside there. Okay, so when you first start this, make sure that this isn't going to be in the way when you start sewing. And again, as I said before, we're just going to edge stitch. So our stitching really is just on the inside of that placket. So again, you need to be as accurate as you can. So when you come to this bit, you're going to have to make sure that that is all together there. So I'm just going to get to the edge. And I'm going to leave my needle in there so that I can lift my pressure foot. Then I can just make sure before I sew that everything is all tucked in underneath. Use a pin if that helps, just to tuck anything in so that we know that that's all going to be sitting really nice and well. So now we're going to continue to the point of our triangle. So again, trying to be really as accurate as you can, just catching the very edge. So again, take your time, make sure you've got it. So again, needle in, pivot that nicely, and then hopefully, as we come across there, we should just catch the rest of that stitching at the top of the placket. So I'm just going to snip my threads. Okay, so we should have a nice shape there at the top of your placket. That's all very neat. And then on the underside, as you can see, we've caught in everything so it's all nice and neat there. At that point, everything's encased. And that's our sleeve placket. So the next thing we need to do is to look at putting in our pleats, because often the width of your sleeve is actually much wider than your cuff. So you do need to make sure that you measure your cuff and that that's going to be the right width of your cuff edge. So in order for that to work, we'll need to put in a pleat. Now you can either put one pleat in or two pleats in. It depends on your pattern. On my pattern, it's got two pleats. So it's entirely up to you. You can just do one pleat. Personally, I like to fold my pleats towards my placket. And I'm putting two in. But as I say, you could do a single one if you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a retaining stitch across there just so that that is in place. But first of all, I am just going to double check that that measurement of that cuff is going to be correct. So that's my measurement from my seam allowance to my seam allowance, which is 23 centimetres. And this is my cuff. And again, as you've seen, I've ironed under my 1 centimetre seam allowances. And actually for this cuff, I have put some iron-on interfacing on here. That's to make the cuff just nice and firm. But it depends on your fabric, to be fair. So let's just measure what that is. So there you have your 23 centimetres. So that should fit nicely in there. So I'm just going to sew a line, as I say, it's just going to be on the inside of the seam allowance, just to hold those in place before I do anything about the cuff. So now my pleats are just been sewn in place. And now I'm going to look at how to make the cuff and then how to insert the cuff onto the sleeve. First of all, I should have explained that it's much easier to do your sleeve guard on your sleeve before you put it into your shirt. You can do it if it's inserted, but it will be very difficult. However, when we come to put the cuff in, we will obviously need the sleeve to be sewn up. So then the sleeve should be set into your shirt before you can actually attach the cuff. On our fashion canvas pages, you will find the step-by-step guide to make your shirt sleeve guard placket, so all the information is also there.